Hello and welcome to Gadget Joe, and today we're taking a look at a case by Antec that's surprisingly cheap yet surprisingly expensive. So in today's video, despite that rather cryptic intro, we're looking at the Antec Nx410, a case that's surprisingly affordable, coming in at currently around £65 to £70. It's one of their mid-range ATX cases. And despite the relatively low price tag of between £65 and maybe £75, I'll leave a link in the description where you can get your hands on one, it does offer some quite premium features. Now, as you can see, it's all set up at the moment, and I do have a system in there. The system currently in there is an AMD Ryzen 8600G APU setup. Now, this is a system made by Logic's PCs. It is indeed a pre-built. I did do a review video on this very system, which I'll leave a link to in the description below, so that you can go and check out how it performs. But for today, we're not really focusing on the system inside. I just thought I'd show it at the start of the video because you can see what it looks like when it's powered up with those two large 140mm fans and the 120mm ARGB fans that are included out of a box straight away. So you can get an idea of what it looks like with a system installed. So what I'm going to do for the sake of this video, it is simply an unboxing and review of the case itself. So it's going to be quite a short one. I'm going to take the power away from this so I can manipulate the case and move around, and we can take a look at the features of the Nx410 and see just what the build quality is like, and obviously the accessibility. So now that the power's disconnected, we can take a better look at the case itself and really dive into exactly the options available in terms of fan support, radiator support, and obviously drive support. Visually, the Nx410 is definitely a looker. It's a full white case with a black bordered door glass panel on the side, which some people may argue that they'd like to see it in white. Maybe it is an option that they can do in the future, but it definitely does look nice and premium. The Antec Nx410 is a mid-tower ATX case, meaning that it has support for full ATX motherboards. It actually has extended support for an extended ATX board as well, so if you're wanting to put something like that in there, you certainly can. And obviously you've got your micro ATX, mini ITX and ITX boards also. They can go in there and fit just fine. The design is very nice and visually striking. It is a full white build with a little bit of black dotted around, mainly on this side glass panel. You do have a completely transparent glass panel. There's no tinting on this glass panel whatsoever, and you do have that black border going around, which some may argue is a little bit counterintuitive on a white case, but I think it actually looks quite nice and it's quite welcomed because most builds do feature a lot of black on them, because even though you can get white components, there's always going to be black parts, so it's nice to have that little bit of contrast between the two. Also, it does draw your attention to this side panel and obviously the system that's inbuilt within. One of the key features about this glass side panel is the way that you can remove it. Now, a lot of panels generally can be removed by thumb screws at the rear, and then you just slide it out, whereas this one is held in place by magnets and some hinges at the rear. So as you can see, you just simply open it and you've got full access to the internals of your PC case. The advantage of this is that you can just simply remove it, and that's it. That's your side panel gone. So if you wanted a little bit more access and you really want to get in there, then you can simply remove it via the hinges, which just slide straight off at the side, as you can see here, and then you've got full access to that case. Inside the Nx410 is a large amount of space considering its small footprint. You do, as mentioned, have support for full-size ATX motherboards, but you also have a significant amount of space at the top above the motherboard for cable access, and obviously you've got more space for fans and radiators. Moving on to the fans and radiators for this case, there is also a large amount of compatibility straight out of a box. On the front, you do get support for up to 3 140mm fans or 3 120mm fans. As far as radiator support, there is plenty of options on the front. Also, you can get a full 360mm radiator in there. Even though the website only states that you can get a 280mm radiator in there, I don't see really why there should be any restrictions or any reasons why you can't put a 420mm radiator in the front of this chassis, because the space is definitely there. Yes, you've got a disc caddy in the PSU shroud at the bottom, but I'm sure you can just simply remove that and then you've got a little bit extra space. But for argument's sake, let's say that you've got a 360mm radiator and obviously a 280mm radiator if you go in the larger fans. You do have those two 140mm ARGB fans, and they do provide a significant amount of airflow, and I've tested that with this setup, as I mentioned earlier in the video. You do also get the 120mm fan at the rear, and that is also ARGB, which means that you can control it through either a button that's on the top of a case, or alternatively you can connect it to a motherboard so that you can control it through your motherboard's RGB software. On the top of the case there's not quite as much room for fans, but you've still got space for two 120 or two 140mm fans, and then obviously for radiators there's support for 240 or 280mm radiators right on the top. That extended amount of space above the motherboard allows even a larger, thicker radiator to fit in there just nicely, even allowing for some space for the CPU cable and cable management. At the rear, it is the simple 120mm fan option. Obviously, you can have a 120mm radiator, but it's a little bit pointless. You can't actually mount a 140mm radiator or fan on the rear, but a 120mm should be more than enough. It is quite a slim and narrow case, so it's quite tall and slim, but the cooling is definitely not an issue with a case like this, because you have that almost full length front panel which is made of the unique mesh, which has a nice interesting pattern on the front. It does draw plenty of air in through this, and then on the sides of the front panel you also have this ventilation, this grille ventilation panel that also draws extra air in. At the bottom you have a solid Antec panel, and then that sort of carries away through on the side of a case as well to give it a two-dimensional look. Removing the front panel is super simple. All you have to do, it's going to be a little bit difficult because I've got it sat on this dolly so I can move it around, but I'll just hold it, and then all you need to do is just pull that front panel off, and as you can see you have then full access to the front to allow you to get to those fans for mounting. Alternatively, you can then mount the fans to the front if you want a thicker radiator mounted on the front of the case. There is a significant amount of space within this front panel as well, so that you can get the fan in there nice and securely and nice and comfortably without any issues of clearance. Looking at the rear of the case, it is pretty much a rear of a case. There's nothing too exciting here. You do have the standard 7 expansion slots, and they are covered with this thumb screw panel that you can use to cover these screws for mounting your graphics cards and then simply securing everything in place. You do have a slot that allows you to put your power supply, which is obviously filled in this case because it has a system in there. The power supply has supports for a full-size power supply. Above that you do have that rear exhaust fan, and then obviously the motherboard I/O cutout. Getting into the back is easy. It's just two simple white thumb screws that you unscrew and then remove the panel to get access to the back. The panel doesn't feature any sound deadening. It doesn't feature anything fancy. It's just a basic panel, but it's all white. It's actually really surprisingly well built because you've got these cutouts that are folded into place to give it that extra bit of strength, but it certainly doesn't feel like they've cheaped out on it. Moving to the back, you have full access to the rear of a motherboard tray, even a large cutout so that you can mount a cooler while the motherboard is installed into the system. Underneath that, you have a mounting tray for a 2.5-inch SSD or old drive, laptop drive. You also have further supports for 2 more SSDs or 2.5-inch drives, again on the side of a panel here, which can then be mounted on the front. Bear in mind that when you use that, you're not going to be able to use the 140mm fans included because they will interrupt with the clearance of the fans. If you do have some older drives, the big 3.5-inch drives, you still have mounting options available to you for that in the form of this caddy at the bottom. There is space for 2 3.5-inch drives on there. So if you still have some of those old drives for mass storage, you've got places to be able to put that in there as well. With that caddy in place, it does impede slightly on the PSU clearance that you get at the bottom of the shroud. With that said, you've got a full-size power supply here, and you've still got an adequate amount of space for cable management. Obviously, removing that, you can then get full access to really allow you more space for cable management. Usually at the back of a case like this, you would see mounted a fan hub or a fan hub controller for controlling the RGB and fans of the case, but they very cleverly mounted it at the top, built into the I/O panel at the top. You don't need to utilize any extra space at the back, meaning that you can keep it nice and clean, and as you can see, the guys that did this system have cable managed it really, really well. At the top of the case, you have a mesh front for the intake and exhaust for the air ventilation, and it is indeed covered by a magnetic dust filter. These are great because you can wash them under the tap and get them clean. Obviously make sure you get them dry before you put them back on. And then also it hides any screws and mounting options for your fans and radiators at the top. So let's put that back into place. Underneath that, you have the top I/O for the case. Starting off with a power button, then you have a smaller button, which is actually your LED control. You have then 2 loading lights, and then you have a microphone and headset audio jack, 2 USB 2 headers, and a USB 3 header. At the bottom of the case, you have 4 legs that can be removed if needed, but it's really not something I'd recommend because having the legs there does allow the system to sit slightly above the ground or the table that you've got it on, allowing for extra airflow. You then also see these 4 screws here, and you undo those to remove the disc caddy in the PSU shroud. Next, you have another black grill mesh panel here, and that is a dust filter for the power supply here. It's a super simple case to build in, lots of access, lots of mounting options, lots of hardware mounting options, and then obviously lots of support for fans and radiators too. So that's my review of the Antec Nx410 case. It is a mid-tower ATX case in all white with a black accent on the front in the form of this glass panel. I do like the fact that it has that glass panel door so that you can really get access to it, even when it's all set up in your desk. The advantage of a door is that you can get in there for any repairs or maintenance of your system without having to take everything off and undoing the screws at the back. When that glass panel is on, obviously it is black, it does stand out a little bit, but I think it's quite intentional because it allows you to really focus on the system built within this. So overall, a really nice solid case from Antec. It's really well built. It doesn't feel cheap considering the price point, obviously only £65 to £70. Definitely something I would recommend. If you want to check out this case in action with a system in it, obviously as I mentioned earlier on in the video, I will leave a link in the description to where you can go and check out the Logix PC build that's in this system in action, and you can really get an idea of what it'll look like on your setup. So that's pretty much it from me. I've been Gadget Joe. This has been the Antec Nx410 Snow White edition, and it gets a big thumbs up from me. And until next time, goodbye.